All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Wanted to just kick off our Elevate Live. And I have a dear friend and colleague that I work with and partner with at LiveRamp. So Chris Garber gave us the opportunity to talk about all around connected planning and connected departments. So Chris, I think everyone wants to get to know you a little bit more and understand why you have all of the different instruments that you need to start a band, and probably which one do you play yourself.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Sarah, and good morning or afternoon or evening to everybody out there. My name's Chris Garber. I'm the SVP of Finance and Operations at LiveRamp. That really means, like Sarah talked about, we've taken sort of a cross-functional approach to finance and ops at LiveRamp. So I've got pieces of finance and FP&A, sales operations, and everything we do supporting the commercial side of the business. Our business technology team, known in other companies as IT, but we really focus on enabling the business and the growth, and our analytics organization. I've been now at LiveRamp and the company that LiveRamp was a part of before, called Axiom, for the last 8 years. And working with this team on both the transformation of Axiom as a company and now LiveRamp's growth as a SaaS company, publicly traded SaaS company, for really the last 3 years. Before that, have spent my entire career really in technology companies and in a various kind of finance and operations finance roles, and a lot of time around FP&A, investor relations, and just everything operational finance. In terms of the band, I've been playing drums since I was 11 years old, so that's my claim to fame. That's my proficiency. Thank you for the drum fill. My kids are playing the piano, so unfortunately I can't play the piano, and I have a guitar here on the side that I know 4 chords, which apparently is enough to bang out a few songs, but not enough to impress you all. So this is sort of the fun room in the house, our office / music room from my place here.
Yeah, I think the next company meeting, we're going to invite you to play a few, to join the band and actually play with the rest of our musicians that we have at our company as well.
Plenty of opportunities to embarrass yourself, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's a constant expression of oneself. So I wanted to dive in, and I think we were just talking about this earlier, but a lot of companies, I mean, especially in tech, but even others, are evolving, changing, and growing rapidly, and are trying to really figure out, like, what are some things to think about? Are there tools or tips or considerations? And I know, Chris, what we were discussing is just like how to be comfortable and uncomfortable, and a lot of grayness in between, but also just like the ability to bring everyone around, like the cross-functional dependencies. And so, Chris, I know one of the unique things that I noticed just starting to work with yourself and LiveRamp is that you have both sales, finance, and IT, but just like really that sales and finance perspective, and what was the intention there? And then also, what have you seen been successful just having the groups working together?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first thing when we kind of started with that design, the thing I think we've all probably lived through in our various companies is sometimes what you see is those organizations might report to 3 or 4 or even 5 different leaders kind of across the company. At LiveRamp, one of the big things as a leadership team we've tried to focus on is, as much as possible, you want to be always kind of looking external, right? Our business is all about our customers, growing the business, building more value into our product, and really for us inside the company, then how do we sort of empower that growth? And oftentimes when those pieces of kind of the operational foundation of the company are scattered across the place, what happens is every meeting sort of becomes an internal meeting. Like, hey, where did you get your data? Or that's not my forecast. Or, well, I was looking at this other report. And so then all of a sudden you're having meetings about, whose facts are right rather than what decision you're going to make or what's the best thing for your customer or something like that. So I think what we've found is this model for us, while I don't think there's a perfect organizational model, this model for us has enabled us to move really quickly while always having one source of truth and really having those various foundations of the company. For us, FP&A, commercial operations, analytics, and IT are really in some ways the teams that the rest of the company is counting on to drive that growth. For us, it's enabled a lot of alignment and the ability to both set priorities, move quickly, and then when you have to pivot or make changes to the approach you're taking, make those changes, much more quickly than we probably would have otherwise been able to do.
So it's definitely efficiency play. It's transparency. So there's not like many different dialogue, but then there's also how people are getting the information. And I know that was a big conversation that we had even a year ago.
Yeah.
As you were thinking about how to help the different groups and different departments working together. What was like, how did you make that decision on going with the technology and then also bringing the different groups together?
Yeah. You mentioned kind of efficiency. I think that's right. But I would say efficiency was one of the outcomes, not necessarily the design. The design was about alignment and knowing that, like, sometimes, especially as a company gets bigger, when you have to get, multiple teams to kind of turn as one, or agree on what the future should look like, that can be really hard and that can slow down decision making and things like that. So I think we've been happy with what we've been able to do with this structure. It's resulted in efficiency, but sort of it's efficiency as an outcome, not necessarily as the only goal. I think the second part that you alluded to was really important, and I think it gets to this idea of, like, why do you do things like connected planning? Again, because we've created a source of truth. What that means is, whether you're in finance, whether you're in sales, whether you're in operations, everyone's really looking at the same data, the same reports, even whether it's in Anaplan, whether it's in our BI tools, whether it's in Salesforce. We've actually done a lot of work to sort of cross-pollinate the data that's available rather than having it, live in one place and you either have access or you don't have access. Our kind of model has been, yes, we care about access. We have security and all those things in place. But what we've tried to do is push the data and the insights out to the particular users. So if the field team is in Salesforce, they can see finance data in Salesforce as well. If the FP&A team is in Anaplan, they can see bookings in Anaplan and don't have to traverse all over the place. So what we've tried to do is sort of democratize that data a little bit and make it available in the systems where people live. And then use BI to provide as much self-service reporting as possible in a way that sort of unifies the different functional areas. So in our self-service reporting, you can see financial data, but you'll also see customer health information. You might see product usage information, and you'll see it kind of all in the same place. And other times where I've seen that as the goal, a lot of times you have these silos that build up. And so you go to one set of reports for financials, but a different set of reports or a different, space for the other things. And it just sort of, it sort of builds these artificial walls when really our objective collectively is to try and connect the dots across those insights, which really is not about finance versus sales versus ops. It's about unifying those things.
Yeah, and I think and you hit on a lot of different points. So, but like one of the things that I always hearing from you and just always in discussions is around inclusive planning. It's a very much like you said, transparency, efficiency is just an outcome, but really making sure there's accountability and understanding of why the direction we're going, why there's pivoting, and almost from there, what I thought was just really effective was just like almost breaking down the process from, identifying how many different reps that you needed to then working with recruitment to be able to see what they need to do to like hire the right roles, to then understanding who actually got hired. So there's not like the what did you call it? Like the silos, unnatural silos, right? And then from there, going back into planning to see if it actually happened, or into Anaplan or the planning tool. I guess, Chris, why is inclusive planning you've talked about all the importance to it, but how do you get people, aligned?
Yeah. Well,
that's been brilliant when I've seen you go like, all right, guys, let's come together.
Well, and we probably talk about it and it sounds perfect, but it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of iteration. And I don't think, we would claim perfection or being done, by a long shot in terms of, what we sort of want it to be and what we aspire to be. But I think there's a couple of things. So one, we were just talking about, the first, I think, is transparency. Is like, to bring people in, you have to have, the process has to be well understood. People's role in that process has to be well understood. And then, in some ways, they have to have the tools at their fingertips to actually participate in the way that you want them to. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. It kind of takes all those, all those pieces working together. I think one of the things that we try to do in the way that we plan, because let's face it, I think we all understand, like, plans are wrong. The day that you set a forecast, the day you set a budget, the day your sales roll up happens, something changes the minute after that happens. And you're also basing it on, the best assumptions you can, but they're assumptions, right? And I think a sort of tone from the top that our CFO has always set is this idea of about being able to triangulate. And so triangulation, I think, comes from having multiple sources of input. So being, the inclusivity of planning kind of, I think, is one element of that. Then you have, data that you're looking at. Some of it might be projected data. Some of it might be historical data. And really in some of those, you're looking for trends, and you're looking for, things that are breaking trends, right? It's like, I want to see what are three things breaking up, or things breaking down. How are they comparing to last month? How are they comparing to last quarter or last year? How do they compare to what we thought was going to happen? So always being able to have multiple vectors of triangulation. And then I would say that having that dialogue in the planning process, like, we have a lot of pieces of our process that engage leaders from our sales team or the executive team and whatever, to bring that intelligence into the process. And we do that then also to, like, be clear on what assumptions have we made, and now how are we measuring whether or not we were right? Because we know at some point everything you assume is going to be wrong. The question is, can you shorten the time to having data to back up those assumptions, to either double down on the things that were right or change the things that turned out to be wrong?
Yeah, and I think, like, one of the questions that just came up here is, and I'll pop it up, but I think people want to hear about how the people that are part of this benefited? And from a day-to-day, month-to-month, I know you're still in the process of it, but like, what are some of the benefits that your team is seeing?
Yes. So I think there's probably a couple, like inside of our organization, which is cross-functional also. I mean, again, it took us work to get here, but much less focus on reconciling numbers and much more focus on what's happening with the business. Is it appropriately reflected in our plans? Have we considered alternative scenarios? Those kinds of things. So it's sort of taking it from out of the data reconciliation, which sort of happens in the early stage of maturity, and increasingly like where we're trying to devote, more and more of our time are those almost the discussions, like pressure testing the forecast. Have we considered this? If Y happened, would our forecast be wrong? Or, have we sort of appropriately thought through the changes that could happen? So I think that's inside of our team. It started to change the nature of the conversations we're having about the outlook and what it would mean for the business. I think in terms of the organizations that we partner with, I think actually in some cases, forecasting and planning for many folks actually just seems like a black box. It's like, I'm in sales, I give my number, somehow the revenue forecast spits out, and I really don't understand how the sausage gets made. But it seems like we make a lot of decisions based on the output, but I don't really know how to connect my day in the life of, of being sort of upper funnel to what comes out of the forecast. And so I think with that, again, we kind of mentioned this word transparency. People are not participating necessarily in every step, but they understand what those steps are and sort of how that process works. And so I think it gives people a lot more ownership of the output, and just a better understanding of, hey, I've got more confidence in the output as well. And as a result, I have more confidence in the decisions that we're making, based on that.
So, So I'm thinking about with growth and what comes with it. We talked a lot about making sure there's not silos between the different groups or different departments, and bringing different people together, because really we're all interdependent, especially as things are growing. But then the other area is, and I'm even personally, taking on the role of a global go-to-market, of how to work with different groups, different countries, and bringing them on and using some of the things that we've already done, but appreciating the uniqueness of cultures, of everything. So what have you been, as you're deploying in new areas, new countries, what have you been thinking about or considering of how to also give them the space to give them the tools so that they can be successful as well and bring their uniqueness to the business?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple of things, and again, I would say we're probably like many of the people on the call, like we're at a place in this journey. We're not at the beginning, but we're definitely not at the end. And so I guess a couple of things. One, at scale, one thing that I think you need is sort of that formula for growth, because really, once you're kind of past the early stages, what you're really trying to do is like, how do you create a growth engine? How do you make growth repeatable? How do you, really magnify the efforts and again, just make that sort of this ongoing cycle. And I think some of the, you look at these companies that have been able to sustain their growth rates for 5, 10, sometimes multiple decades. Every one of those companies at some point like figured out what their kind of formula for growth was and just really, focused on turbocharging it. So I think like there's two sides to the coin. One is creating as much as you can that simple formula for growth that then you can really put a lot of resources into and just make the growth as repeatable as possible. That's how you scale it. But I think the second side of the coin is along the way, whether you're thinking about new product introduction or geographic expansion or what have you, is understanding that like that growth can't be one size fits all, and that that growth is not going to, what works, let's say, in the center of the company is not necessarily going to work for that, new product you just launched or the new geography that you're going to try and get into. In fact, those efforts often sort of look like mini companies, or they look like little startup companies, and they don't have the same abilities, or we may not know the same things about those markets that we know about maybe where the company started. And so I think making sure that your process and the way that you're running the business actually accommodates for the fact that the newest bets that you're placing, which are really about driving future growth, the newest bets are not necessarily going to work the same way that maybe your core business or your legacy business did. And so you need to build enough flexibility into what you're doing that you can, in some ways, those areas of the business, they may be smaller, but they need even more resource. You're not really counting on efficiency from those places yet. And so they might be a little bit more custom, or they might be more manual in terms of how they need to work, even if they're smaller. But I think that's a key part of this idea of how are you inclusive, and how do you create a long-term growth engine? It's recognizing that different parts of your business need a different granularity, a different way of planning based on their maturity, not just the maturity in your process. And so I think one thing that we're trying to do, given where we are in our stage, is increasingly scale the parts of our growth that are more repeatable and tied to sort of that engine, but at the same time build more flexibility at the edges so that we can be more accommodating for the new things that are happening in the business, which are really the growth engines of the future.
Yeah, and I think, like, I remember just working with EMEA and APAC and having a starting point that, there are certain things that they need, and they're modeling, because the granularity is different, right? Based on size, based on considerations, based on currencies, right? And building it so that this is a start, but it could adjust or change. I think that when applying technology and people collectively with growth, you have to almost think of like build now, but knowing almost like your forecast, right? You got your original, and then you keep evolving as the business is changing.
Yeah. And I think, Sarah, that goes like kind of on two directions. One is like we just went through, like rolling out new capabilities. I mean, I think the global aspects of the planning process and projects like we've been working on, they're you kind of have to walk in eyes wide open. Like I think you and I were it's like there's some like dirty little secrets about this. Is like they're hard. They don't all work the way that you want. When you go live, everything is not green.
Right.
That's actually like, and if I think we've all learned anything through this transformation we've been on, even back to Axiom, it's that at some point the projects that are actually the easy projects are done. It's the hard kind of gruddy, cross-functional projects that are about unlocking sort of the next inflection point for the team or for the company. They're really tricky to get right. And so it takes a lot of planning, but it takes also a lot of perseverance from the team to get through them. I know it certainly did for our team. And then increasingly, as you have different languages, different time zones, complexity from multi-currency and all those things, there's a real kind of interesting nuance about we're a company that international is a small but very fast growing part of our business. And ironically, you could argue that like international is the best testing ground for new capabilities for us, because it kind of surfaces all the complexities on day one. But the flip side, and I don't think we would claim to have gotten this right yet. The flip side is often those are the teams that have the least resource, because most of the resources like sitting back, in the center in a US company. And so we have a lot of lessons learned even from this last project we did on how to do, that we're talking about how to apply, sort of to the next one, which is how do you use the international requirements as really a way to build a very robust view of what you're going to need to be successful, but try to harness the US resource to actually get that deployed. Because we need to, we in our project, we needed to do more to actually support our international teams, given the size. And by the way, they have a business, we all have day jobs and businesses to run while you're trying to do some of this transformation at the same time. So, it is tricky. And like a few of the things we've talked about, it takes iteration and practice, and you don't get it right the first time.
Yeah. And I think it's a learning. It's like that learning journey that any type of modeling or any type of understanding the data, everybody has to almost come in with that curiosity, knowing that it's going to show things maybe people didn't even know or realize or don't like. It also gives the light to the things that are going well. Because I think sometimes we go off our gut, not sometimes, we know what we know, we see what we think. Perception is one thing, but the data is really going to tell you, doesn't matter good or bad, but it's just going to tell you how it is. And I have to say your team commitment, knowing the resourcing, even internationally, they still were in it and wanting to, knowing that as they grow, that they need something that will support them as they evolve. So I appreciate everybody's commitment there. And then another question, which is more around what advice would you give peers looking to start their financial planning journey?
Yeah. And I saw the other question too about like, what does phase 2 look like? Maybe I'll kind of join those two a little bit.
Yep.
I mean, again, I think probably two major things that I feel like we actually did get right. One is being really intentional about like, what does success look like? And what are you actually building towards? That seems so easy and so basic, but often I think, and I'm sure people on this call, everyone's been part of a project that you were like, we did a kickoff and we weren't quite sure where we were headed. Like, I think it's human nature to like see the next thing and want to get going and be excited about sort of that next thing. So again, I think up front, given we were just talking about the kind of complexities that exist, the need to build cross-functional alignment to get some of these things right, I would say up front, it's really being clear, like writing it down, documenting where are we trying to get? Why are we doing this? What's the outcome we're expecting from the business? Or what do we expect it to mean for the business? Something that we did was like actually write down some of the guiding principles, like in absence of X, we're going to default to simple, or, just sort of some basic things that you can come back to when there's a fight about whether to go left or go right. We'll come back to the guiding principles. So I think, that's one piece. And so upfront, really thinking about, I would say this idea of like, go slow to go fast. Going fast up front often results in having to go slow later to replan and figure it out. So I'm a big fan of go slow to go fast, and then go as fast as you can. The second thing, which again is not sexy, but I would say is like get the data right. When we actually started the transformation back at Axiom, we spent almost 9 months at the beginning re-architecting all of our data. And that was, I think we believed strongly in the concept of sort of garbage in, garbage out. And I think, I've certainly lived through experiences where I didn't do that the way that we probably should have. And then you just spend so much more time later trying to, figure out how to, fit a square peg back in a round hole. So actually, again, another sort of go slow to go fast moment was like really getting the data right, being clear about your system architecture, your data, who is going to own it, who's going to keep it up to date, those kinds of things. It just means that you can trust that and count on that basically for all the downstream things that you're doing. So in terms of thinking about like phase 1, phase 2, so like a few things I was just talking about were sort of phase 0. Phase 1 for us has been really kind of the growth planning that we've been talking about, getting kind of our go-to-market formula right, using a lot more drivers in forecasting, both revenue drivers as well as expense drivers, to really try and amp up the efficiency of how we plan, simplifying a lot of things to try and get to like fewer drivers instead of lots of, manual inputs. But also with that, one thing that was a big objective of ours was by simplifying the inputs, we were going to push out the planning horizon. So add more time to our planning horizon. So moving from, call it, 4 quarters or current fiscal year to really current plus next fiscal year, and the ability to actually go beyond that. So that was a game changer for us, and a big reason of why we just did this sort of this most recent push. As a SaaS business, I mean, as an example, like our hiring plan for sales today is really actually determined on what our bookings or goals are, 3 quarters or even 4 quarters from now. And so just by nature of our business, we have to be planning sort of at a minimum on a rolling, call it 6-quarter basis. And so we've tried to work that back basically in everything we're doing so that we always have, we're trying to look out over the horizon really as far as we can, which is obviously tricky. And the way that you can do that is by simplifying the inputs and focusing on drivers and then measuring the accuracy of those drivers over time to do that. I think the next phase for us probably looks like bringing a lot more non-financial data into the planning process. So starting to think about things like the marketing funnel and how do we use that to do a better job forecasting, let's say something like new logo growth. We do that today, but it's still more driven by like what we can see in the pipeline. And what we'd like to do is like move that farther upstream into kind of the realm of marketing and more top of funnel activities. The second thing might be more looking at how do we predict upsell or contraction using the instrumentation we've built on customer health. So we've spent a lot of time from a BI perspective empowering our customer success and customer experience teams. That's really helped us build out some of those operational processes. It's not really that intelligence is not yet being accessed for how we plan and forecast. And so I think that's a dot that in the future, I think we would see is one that we would like to connect. I think that the examples I just gave, most of where we're trying to push things is all about the growth side of the equation. So very heavily focused on go-to-market, customers, and growth. We're trying to keep as simple as possible things like expense forecasting. It's kind of like, I want to innovate on the growth side. I don't really care to innovate as much. As long as our expense forecast is accurate and it's meeting the needs of the growth equation, like, are we doing a good job forecasting things like headcount and capacity? As long as we get that right, we're going to put a lot more of our effort into sort of the top line side of the equation.
Yeah, and I think that that's all a part of the plan of bringing everyone together, having a good connected planning of sorts, and or inclusive planning that we were talking about. And also just I appreciate the fact that it's not easy. This isn't overnight or, even in a year, because if you're going to continue to grow as an organization, I like that the focus is on growth, because that is where your company is doing, while knowing that there will be opportunities to see how the expenses, is it trending up? Is it trending down? Is it staying equate? Those are all questions, as you're, like you said, driver based, that should naturally come into alignment. But I could talk about this all day, Chris, as you know, and I think you can too. But one of the things we always ask anyone that comes on our LinkedIn Live is, what is the book that you're currently reading and that you want to share with the rest to consider as maybe adding to their reading rotation?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is many people out there have read the book Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal. And that's one actually that we've read and we sort of talked about back at Axiom. So the book actually I just finished was written by a guy named Chris Fussell, who was his chief of staff. And so it's a new book. It's called One Mission, and it's actually the implementation guide for the Team of Teams. And so as kind of a operations person, whatever, I'm always kind of I read the theory and I'm like, okay, well, that's great. There's some great ideas here, but how do I put it into practice? So for me, this book was I was like, thank God somebody wrote it. And it was literally the implementation guide to the Team of Teams. So that one's a lot of fun in terms of breaking it down. And I think some of the things even that we talked about today, you'll see sort of in there and actually see how much intentionality and testing and sort of not getting it right the first time and sticking with it. It's kind of there's a lot of themes that we talked about today that I think you'll all see in that book as well.
I love it. I mean, I just added it to the list. And thank you again, Chris, for joining. And thank you, everybody, for participating. And have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, morning. Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. See you later.